They tell you your voice doesn't matter when you're a rejected Omega, that you should stay silent, invisible, grateful for whatever scraps of dignity they allow you to keep. But when they dragged me onto that platform and handed me the Luna hymn as a joke, when they expected me to fail in front of the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, they forgot one crucial thing. Some voices don't ask for permission to be heard. They command it. The pack allegiance ceremony was supposed to be Morvana's moment of glory. My pack leader's daughter had spent weeks preparing to present herself to Alpha King Caldric, convinced that her silver coat and prestigious bloodline would catch the eye of a king searching for a queen. While she preened and practiced her curtsy, I stayed where rejected Omegas belong, in the kitchens, out of sight, scrubbing floors that would gleam for wolves who would never notice my existence. But Morvana had always enjoyed her cruelties, and having the Alpha King as an audience made her bolder than usual. When the formal presentations ended and the feast began, she whispered to her father, and they both smiled, with the kind of malice that made my stomach clench. Within minutes, I was dragged from the kitchens by guards, still wearing my stained work dress, my hair uncombed, my hands red from lye soap. "Your Majesty," Pack Leader Aldrich announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall. "We have a special entertainment for you. Our most humble pack member wishes to honor you with the sacred Luna hymn." Laughter rippled through the crowd. The Luna hymn was reserved for coronations, for Luna queens accepting their sacred duty. For a rejected Omega to sing it was not just presumptuous, it was heresy. The joke was perfect. They would watch me humiliate myself, watch me fail to hit the impossible notes, watch me prove exactly how worthless I was. I stood on that platform looking at 300 wolves waiting for me to fail at Morvana's triumphant smirk, at Pack Leader Aldrich's cruel eyes. And at the back of the hall, seated on a throne that had been brought specifically for this ceremony, was Alpha King Caldric Ironmaw, scarred, powerful, and watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I could have refused, could have begged for mercy, could have run. Instead, I opened my mouth and sang. The first note left my lips, and the laughter died. The second note made the candles flare brighter. By the third, the air itself seemed to shimmer with power. I had never sung the Luna hymn before, had never been allowed to learn it, but somehow the words and melody came to me as if they'd been sleeping in my blood, waiting for this exact moment. The hall erupted in light, not from the candles or the chandeliers, but from me, from my voice, from the ancient magic responding to frequencies that no modern wolf even remembered existed. The Luna hymn wasn't just a song, it was a summons, a prayer, a command that reality itself had to answer. And when I finished, when the last note faded into ringing silence, I looked at Alpha King Caldric and saw something that made my heart stop. He was frozen, not moving, barely breathing, staring at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking for a lifetime. Then he stood, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "This Omega comes with me, now." Chapter 1, The Rejected One. The basement of Shadow Pine Pack House smelled of damp stone and forgotten things. Selthra had lived there for 6 years, ever since her 20th birthday passed without a single courtship offer, confirming what everyone already knew. She was defective, unmated, rejected by fate itself. "Omega," Morvana's voice echoed down the stairs, sharp and imperious. "The breakfast service is cold. Do you want Father to hear about this?" Selthra wiped flour from her hands and hurried up the narrow steps, her heart already racing with familiar dread. She found Morvana in the formal dining room, Beautiful in a silk morning gown, golden hair perfectly arranged, the Alpha's daughter looked at Selthra the way one might look at a stain on expensive carpet. Mild disgust mixed with the irritation of having to acknowledge it existed. "I'm sorry, Miss Morvana. I'll reheat everything immediately." "Don't bother." Morvana waved a dismissive hand. "Just remember that the pack allegiance ceremony is in 3 days. The Alpha King himself will be here." She smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. "Obviously, you'll stay in the basement during the festivities. We can't have you embarrassing us in front of royalty." "Of course." Selthra kept her gaze lowered, waiting for permission to leave. "You know what I heard?" Morvana leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow made it crueler. "They say Alpha King Caldric is searching for a queen. Can you imagine? If he chose me, I'd be Luna Queen of the entire kingdom." She laughed, light and musical. "What do you think about that, Omega?" "I think you'd make a beautiful queen, Miss Morvana." "I know." Morvana straightened, already losing interest. "Now clean this up, and try not to be so pathetic. It's depressing." Selthra cleared the barely touched breakfast, her hand steady despite the familiar ache in her chest. This was her life, had been for years. She scraped plates, hauled water, scrubbed floors that gleamed for wolves who never saw her. She existed in the spaces between their notice, a shadow they occasionally acknowledged just to remind her she was beneath them. The only time she felt real was at night, after the pack house settled into sleep, after the last candle was extinguished and the last door closed. Selthra would climb to the roof through a maintenance hatch only she knew about. There, under the stars, she would sing, not loudly, never loudly, just soft melodies her mother had taught her before dying of fever when Selthra was 12. Songs about moonlight and belonging, about wolves who ran free and hearts that beat without fear. Her voice was the one thing that felt like hers, the one part of herself that rejection couldn't touch. She didn't know why singing felt like breathing, why the notes came so easily when everything else in her life was hard. She only knew that in those stolen moments on the roof, she wasn't a rejected Omega. She was simply Selthra, and her voice made the night sky feel less vast and lonely. On the evening before the ceremony, Selthra was scrubbing pots when Aldrich himself appeared in the kitchen doorway. The pack leader rarely acknowledged her existence, and his presence made every instinct scream danger. "Selthra." His smile was cold calculation. "My daughter has suggested something rather entertaining for tomorrow's feast. You'll be part of the evening's presentations." Her blood turned to ice. "Sir, I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You need to obey." Aldrich's eyes glittered with the same cruel amusement she'd seen in Morvana's. "Consider it an honor. Not many rejected Omegas get to perform for a king." He left before she could respond, and Selthra stood alone in the kitchen, her hands trembling in the wash water. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't an honor. It was a trap, another humiliation, bigger and more public than any before. But she had no choice. She'd never had a choice. That night, she didn't sing on the roof. She sat in her basement room and tried not to think about tomorrow, about standing before the Alpha King and whatever cruelty Morvana had devised. Sleep came late and brought no comfort, only dreams of being seen, truly seen, and finding nothing but contempt in the eyes watching her. Chapter 2. The Cruel Stage. The great hall blazed with candlelight and ambition. Selthra watched from behind the kitchen doors as Morvana glided toward the throne where Alpha King Caldric sat, every movement calculated to display grace and breeding. She wore crimson silk that matched her lips, and her rehearsed curtsy was flawless. "Your Majesty," Morvana's voice carried across the hall, sweet as poisoned honey. "Shadow Pine Pack is honored by your presence. We offer our loyalty and our strongest wolves to your service." Caldric Ironmaw looked exactly as the stories described, scarred, powerful, with eyes like winter steel that seemed to see through pretense. He nodded politely, but his expression remained neutral, unimpressed. Morvana's smile tightened. She'd expected more. They all had. The formal presentations continued, each pack family offering pledges and gifts, each one hoping to catch the king's attention. But Caldric's face grew more distant with each performance, and Selthra saw Aldrich's jaw clench with growing desperation. This was supposed to be Shadow Pine's moment of elevation. Instead, they were being dismissed like every other minor pack. Then Aldrich stood, and his voice boomed across the hall. "Your Majesty, we have one final entertainment. Something special." Guards appeared at the kitchen doors. Selthra's stomach dropped as they grabbed her arms, dragging her into the hall despite her protests. 300 wolves turned to stare as she was hauled onto the presentation platform, still wearing her stained kitchen dress, her hair falling loose from its braid. "This Omega has requested the honor of performing the Luna hymn for your Majesty," Aldrich announced, and laughter rippled through the crowd. The Luna hymn, sacred, reserved for coronations, requiring vocal ranges that even trained singers struggled to achieve. For a rejected Omega to attempt it was heresy. Morvana's delighted smile confirmed everything. This was the humiliation she'd planned. Public, devastating, perfect. "I can't," Selthra whispered, but no one was listening. "Sing," Aldrich commanded, "or be punished for refusing a direct order." Selthra looked at the sea of faces, mockery, anticipation, cruelty. At the back of the hall, Alpha King Caldric watched with an expression she couldn't decipher. She could refuse, could accept whatever punishment Aldrich invented, could let them break her one final time, or she could sing. The first note left her lips tentatively, searching for the melody she'd only heard once, years ago, at a distant ceremony. But something happened as her voice found the ancient words. Something shifted inside her chest, like a door opening in a room she hadn't known existed. The second note came stronger, and the candles flared brighter. The third note made the air shimmer. By the fourth, light erupted from Selthra's body, not reflected light, but pure luminescence that poured from her throat with each word of the hymn. The melody soared higher, impossibly higher, her voice reaching frequencies that made the crystal chandelier sing in harmony. The Luna hymn wasn't just music anymore. It was power, ancient, undeniable, devastating. The hall blazed like midday sun. Wolves shielded their eyes. The stone floor beneath Selthra's feet glowed with runic patterns that hadn't been visible for centuries, reacting to her voice like iron to a magnet. She sang the final verse, a prayer to the moon goddess, a blessing for the chosen Luna, and the power crescendoed until the very air crackled with energy. Then silence, absolute, ringing silence. Selthra stood in the center of fading light, her body shaking, her throat raw. She didn't understand what had happened, didn't understand the magic that had poured through her like water through broken glass. Alpha King Caldric rose from his throne. Every eye turned to him as he descended the dais, his footsteps echoing in the stunned quiet. He walked directly to Selthra and stopped 3 feet away, his expression transformed from neutral observation to something between awe and desperate relief. "What is your name?" His voice was rough, controlled. "Selthra." It came out barely audible. "Selthra." He repeated it like a prayer, then louder, addressing the hall. "By the law of recognition and the authority of the crown, I claim this Omega under royal protection. She comes with me to the capital, immediately." "Your Majesty," Aldrich's face had gone pale. "Surely there's been a misunderstanding. She's just a rejected Omega. She has no value." "She's a true singer." Caldrick's voice cut through the protest like a blade. "The first found in 3 generations, and she is now under my direct authority." His eyes found Aldrich's, and there was no mercy in them. "Refuse me, an answer for treason." Morvana made a sound like a wounded animal. Aldrich's mouth worked silently, but they both bowed, because what else could they do? Caldrick turned back to Selthra, and for the first time in her life, someone looked at her like she mattered. "Pack what you need. We leave within the hour." Chapter 3. The King's Fortress. Ironmaw Keep rose from the northern mountains like a crown of stone and shadow. Selthra pressed her face to the carriage window as they approached, watching towers pierce the clouds and massive walls that had withstood 1,000 years of siege. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. And somehow, impossibly, it was where she was supposed to live now. Caldrick had barely spoken during the 3-day journey, though she'd felt his eyes on her constantly, that intense, watchful gaze that made her feel like she was a puzzle he was desperately trying to solve. When they finally stopped in the fortress courtyard, he offered his hand to help her down with formal courtesy that felt strange after a lifetime of being dismissed. "Welcome to Ironmaw," he said quietly. "This is your home now, Selthra. No one will harm you here." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the rejected Omega who'd lived in a basement could suddenly be safe in a king's fortress. But trust was a luxury she'd learned to live without. A massive wolf with silver-shot fur approached, his bearing military precise. "Your Majesty, the council is demanding an immediate audience about your acquisition." "They can wait." Caldrick's tone brooked no argument. "Thormund, this is Selthra. Selthra, my beta and closest advisor, Thormund Stoneheart. He'll help you understand what's happening here." Thormund's eyes softened as he looked at her, and Selthra saw something unexpected: relief. "It's an honor to meet you, miss. Truly. We'd thought." He glanced at Caldrick. "We'd given up hope." "Hope for what?" Selthra's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Perhaps we should speak privately," Caldrick said, gesturing toward the keep. "There's much you need to know." They led her through corridors of polished stone to a study lined with ancient books and weapons that looked like they'd seen real battle. Caldrick poured wine with hands that trembled slightly, the first sign of vulnerability she'd seen from him. "What I'm about to tell you must remain secret," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Thormund, you explain." "I can't. The king is cursed," Thormund said bluntly. 5 years ago, when he refused to grant the Witch Council political power, they retaliated. Every full moon, His Majesty transforms into something else, not just a wolf, a beast, mindless, violent, barely contained by the strongest magic we possess. Selthra's blood went cold. "That's why you claimed me. Not because of what I did, but because you need." "True singers," Caldrick interrupted, his voice raw. "Omegas born with voices powerful enough to channel reality itself. Ancient texts say they're the only ones who can halt transformation curses, but the bloodline was thought extinct 3 generations ago. Every Omega we tested, he met her eyes, until you sang that hymn and proved the legends were real. You want me to stop your transformation. It wasn't a question. I want you to save my life. Caldrick's composure cracked, and suddenly she saw past the king to the desperate man underneath. Every full moon, I lose more of myself. The beast grows stronger, the man weaker. The royal mages estimate I have 6 moons left before the transformation becomes permanent, before I become a monster that will have to be executed for the kingdom's safety. But why me? Selthra's hands clenched in her lap. I don't know anything about this power. I don't even understand what happened in that hall. We have texts, Thormund said gently. Knowledge passed down from the age of singers. We can teach you to control it. But we needed to find you first. He paused. His Majesty has been searching the kingdom for 5 years, visiting every pack, hoping to find even a trace of singer blood. When you sang that hymn, I saw my salvation, Caldrick finished, or at least the possibility of it. He moved closer, not threatening but imploring. I won't force you, Selthra. You've been forced enough in your life, but I'm asking, begging, for your help. Learn to use your gift, try to break this curse, and in return I swear on my crown that you'll never be rejected again, never be dismissed or diminished. You'll have status, protection, purpose, everything you were denied. Selthra looked at him, really looked, and saw the scars on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes, the quiet desperation of a man watching his own extinction approach. He could have commanded her, could have simply used her like a tool. Instead, he was asking, I don't know if I can save you, she whispered. Neither do I. Caldrick's smile was sad. But you're the only chance I have, the only chance any of us have. Outside the study window, the moon was already rising, 3/4 full, growing toward the night when Caldrick would transform again, and they would discover if a rejected Omega's voice was strong enough to hold back a king's curse. Chapter 4. The voice that binds the training chamber was circular, its walls carved with symbols that seemed to pulse when Selthra sang. Caldrick stood across from her, patient and focused, listening as she attempted the 3rd exercise of the morning, a simple note that should have made the air shimmer. You're holding back, he said gently. I can hear it. You're afraid of the power? I'm afraid of what it means. Selthra lowered her hands, frustrated. All my life, I was told I was nothing. Now you're saying I can bend reality with my voice? It doesn't make sense. Caldrick crossed the distance between them, and she noticed how carefully he moved, always giving her space to retreat, never crowding. It makes perfect sense. They rejected you because they sensed something different, something powerful. Wolves fear what they don't understand, especially when it challenges the hierarchy they've built their world on. So they made me believe I was broken instead. Yes, his eyes held hers, but you were never broken, Selthra. You were always exactly what you were meant to be. Something cracked open in her chest at those words. For 3 days, Caldrick had treated her like this, with respect, patience, genuine interest in her thoughts. He asked her opinion on matters of state. He ensured she had comfortable quarters and clothing that actually fit. He listened when she spoke. She'd never been listened to before. Try again, he encouraged. But this time, don't think about the technique. Think about what you want the world to become. Intention shapes singer magic more than any formula. Selthra closed her eyes and sang, This time, she didn't focus on hitting the right frequency. She thought about safety, about peace, about a world where no one had to sleep in basements and eat scraps. Her voice rose, and the air didn't just shimmer, it blazed with golden light that warmed everything it touched. When she opened her eyes, Caldric was smiling, really smiling, not the formal courtesy he showed his court. There, that's what you're capable of when you stop apologizing for existing. They worked until dusk, and Selthra felt something she hadn't experienced in years: joy, purpose, the sense that maybe, impossibly, she belonged somewhere. That night, she was reading in her quarters when a sound made her blood freeze, a howl, agonized, inhuman, coming from somewhere deep in the keep. She ran without thinking, following the terrible noise to a reinforced chamber where Thormund stood outside, his face grim. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but there was no force behind it. "What's happening?" "Partial moon. Sometimes the transformation begins even when it's not full." Another howl, and this time Selthra heard words beneath it, Caldric's voice screaming in pain. She pushed past Thormund into the chamber. Caldric was on his knees, his body caught between forms, bones cracking, reshaping, fur erupting along his spine. His face was a mask of agony, eyes flickering between human intelligence and animal madness. He saw her and managed one word: run. Selthra didn't run. She dropped to her knees in front of him and began to sing. Not the Luna hymn, not any spell Caldric had taught her, just a lullaby her mother had sung when she was small, a simple melody about moonlight and safety and home. She sang it directly to Caldric, to the man fighting to stay human, to the beast trying to emerge, to whatever existed between them. Her voice wrapped around him like invisible chains, gentle but unbreakable. The transformation stopped. Caldric's body froze mid-change, caught in that horrible in-between state, but his eyes cleared, human, present, aware. "Don't stop," he gasped. "Please, don't stop singing." So she didn't. She sang that lullaby over and over, her hands hovering near him, wanting to touch but afraid to break whatever magic was holding him together. Hours passed. The partial moon set, and slowly, painfully, Caldric's body reverted to human form. When it was finished, he collapsed forward and Selthra caught him without thinking. He was shaking, his skin fever-hot, his breathing ragged. "You did it," Thormund breathed from the doorway. "By the goddess, you actually held back the transformation." "It hurt him," Selthra whispered, stroking Caldric's sweat-soaked hair. "I could feel how much it hurt." "Less than completing the transformation would have." Caldric's voice was barely audible. "Much less than becoming the beast." He lifted his head to look at her, and in his eyes was something between gratitude and wonder. "Your voice. It's not just powerful, Selthra. It's the first thing in 5 years that's been stronger than this curse." "I didn't know what I was doing. I just sang what felt right." Maybe that's exactly what singer magic needs. He struggled to sit up, wincing. Not formulas and techniques, just truth. Thormund helped Caldric to his feet and toward his chambers, but at the door, the king turned back to Selthra. "Thank you for not running, for staying, when every instinct must have told you to flee." "You asked for my help," Selthra said simply. "I'm trying to give it." After they left, she stood alone in that reinforced chamber, her throat raw from hours of singing, her mind reeling from what she'd witnessed. She'd held back a transformation curse with nothing but a childhood lullaby and the desperate wish to ease someone else's pain. Maybe Caldric was right. Maybe she'd never been broken. Maybe she'd always been exactly what she was meant to be, She just needed someone to believe it first. Chapter 5. Court of Whispers. The throne room fell silent when Selthra entered, and not the respectful kind. It was the silence of predators evaluating prey, of nobles calculating exactly how to destroy the Omega, who'd somehow infiltrated their perfect hierarchy. Lords and ladies of the court, Caldric announced from his throne, his voice carrying absolute authority. I present Selthra of Shadowpine, true singer and honored guest of the crown. She is under my direct protection. The whispers started immediately, low, vicious, carefully pitched to carry. True singer, more like true charlatan. I heard she used forbidden magic to bewitch him. Omega trash pretending to be special. Pathetic. Selthra forced herself to stand straight, to keep her chin up, but inside she was that basement girl again. Small and unwanted and desperately trying to be invisible. A noble woman in emerald silk approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How fascinating, Lady Corvessa purred, looking Selthra up and down like spoiled meat. Tell me, dear, what pack did you say you were from? Shadowpine, my lady. Shadowpine. Corvessa's laugh was crystalline and cruel. I'm sorry, I don't recognize the name. Must be terribly minor. She turned to the nobles flanking her. Isn't it interesting how His Majesty suddenly discovered this ancient power right when he needs a solution to his problem? Lady Corvessa. Thormund appeared, at Selthra's side, his presence solid and protective. The king's business is not court gossip. Of course not, Beta Thormund. I merely find the timing convenient. Her eyes glittered with malice. One might even say suspiciously convenient. Over the following days, the whispers metastasized into coordinated attacks. Selthra found her quarters ransacked, her few possessions destroyed. Anonymous notes appeared calling her a fraud, a seductress, a danger to the kingdom. In court sessions, the royal advisors, severe men in black robes who watched her with cold calculation, questioned every decision Caldric made regarding her. Your Majesty, Advisor Malcor said during one particularly tense meeting, the Council must protest your allocation of resources to this singer training. We have no proof such abilities exist beyond parlor tricks and manipulation. I have proof, Caldric said coldly. I was there when she sang the Luna hymn, when she manifested power that hasn't been seen in generations. Legends and light shows. Malcor's smile was thin. Perhaps His Majesty is too close to this situation to see it objectively. The Omega could be using any number of forbidden magics to create illusions, to make you believe. Enough, Caldric's voice cracked like a whip. Question my judgment again, Malcor, and find yourself questioning it from outside these walls. But the damage was done. Selthra felt the court's hostility like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. Only Thormund and a handful of loyal guards treated her with respect, and even they couldn't be everywhere at once. She found Caldric in his study late one night, staring at maps he clearly wasn't seeing. You should send me away, she said quietly. I'm destroying your credibility with your own court. He looked up, and the exhaustion in his eyes made her heart ache. You're saving my life. That's worth more than their approval. Is it? If they won't follow you because of me, what's the point? Caldric crossed to her, and for once, he didn't maintain careful distance. He took her hands in his, and his touch was gentle despite the calluses and scars. The point is that you matter, Selthra, not because of what you can do for me, but because you exist, because you're brave and kind and you've survived things that would have broken most wolves. His voice softened. They're afraid of you. That's why they attack, because a rejected Omega with world-changing power threatens everything they've built their status on. I don't feel powerful. I feel like I'm drowning. I know. He squeezed her hands. But you're not alone in the water. I'm here. Thormund's here, and we won't let you drown. That night, Selthra sang for him again, not to hold back a transformation, but simply because he'd asked, because the music seemed to ease the tension in his shoulders. She sang about stars and safety and second chances, and when she finished, Kaldrick was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. "What?" she asked. "I was just thinking," he said quietly, "that the curse might have been the best thing that ever happened to me, because without it, I never would have found you." Selthra's breath caught. In the candlelight, with the court's hostility temporarily forgotten, she saw past the scars and the crown to the man who'd treated her with more respect in 2 weeks than her pack had shown in 24 years. "I'm glad you found me too," she whispered. Outside the study, Advisor Malcor stood in the shadows listening. His eyes glowed briefly with unnatural light before he turned and walked away, already composing the message he would send to the Witch Council. The singer was becoming too comfortable, too close to the king. They would need to accelerate their plans. Chapter 6. The Singer's Legacy. The archive was buried 3 levels beneath Ironmaw Keep, its air thick with the scent of ancient paper and forgotten histories. Selthra ran her fingers along leather spines, searching for anything about singers, about what she was supposed to be. Here. Thormund pulled down a tome bound in silver, its pages yellowed with age. The Chronicle of the First Voices. It's one of the few complete records that survived the purges. Selthra opened it carefully, and the words seemed to burn into her mind. The first singers were Omegas blessed by the moon goddess herself, given voices that could reshape reality through sound. They were healers, mediators, powerful beyond measure. But their power threatened the wolves who'd built empires on strength and dominance. They were hunted, she whispered, reading accounts of coordinated attacks across territories, systematically, for centuries, by wolves who feared what they couldn't control. Thormund's voice was heavy. Singer bloodlines were targeted, scattered, driven to hide their gifts. Most were killed. A few survived by never manifesting their power, by being so rejected and diminished that the magic stayed dormant. Selthra's hands trembled as understanding crashed over her. My rejection wasn't random. The pack sensed what I was. They rejected me instinctively, trying to prevent this power from waking up. Probably. Thormund met her eyes. You said you were always different. Always drawn to singing. That was the bloodline trying to express itself despite everything. She turned more pages and found illustrations, singers with light pouring from their mouths, wolves cowering or attacking, battles that had been erased from official histories. The Luna hymn itself was there, annotated in ancient script, a prayer for blessing, a weapon for survival, a test of true blood. They created it as both, Selthra breathed. Beautiful enough to honor the goddess, powerful enough to defend themselves when beauty wasn't enough. She was so absorbed in reading that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. Pain exploded across the back of her skull. She fell forward, the book sliding from her hands as rough fingers grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. Cold steel pressed against her throat. Should have stayed in your basement, Omega, a voice hissed. Should have stayed silent. Selthra tried to scream, but the blade was already cutting, already stealing her voice before she could use it. Blood ran hot down her neck. She was going to die here, in an archive full of dead singers, just another name that would be erased from history. Then Caldric was there, moving faster than anything human should, his hand closing around the attacker's wrist with bone-crushing force. The knife clattered away. Selthra collapsed, her hands pressed to her throat, feeling blood pulse between her fingers. "Guards!" Caldric's roar echoed through the archive. He knelt beside Selthra, his face pale with terror. "Don't try to speak. Don't move. Thormund, get the healers now." More guards flooded in, dragging away 2 attackers dressed as servants. Selthra's vision blurred, the archive spinning. She could feel the cut, not deep enough to kill immediately, but positioned to destroy her vocal cords, to silence her forever. The healers arrived in a chaos of urgency, their magic knitting flesh and saving her life but unable to fully repair the damage. When Selthra finally tried to speak hours later, her voice came out raspy and painful. "Don't," Caldric said gently, sitting beside her bed. "You need to rest. Let the healing finish." "Who?" she croaked. "Kitchen staff. But they were paid by someone in the court. We're still investigating." His jaw clenched. "They confessed under interrogation. They were told to make it look like an accident, but if that failed, to ensure you could never sing again." Selthra's hand went to the bandage at her throat. The message was clear. Her voice was the threat. Without it, she was nothing again. Disposable again. "I won't let them," Caldric said, and his voice carried absolute conviction. "I will find everyone involved in this attack, and they will answer for it. But more than that," he took her hand carefully, "I won't let them make you afraid to use your voice. I won't let them win by silencing you again." "Too late," Selthra whispered, already silent. "No." He squeezed her hand. "You're healing, and when you can sing again, and you will sing again, I'll make sure the entire kingdom hears you. Not as an Omega they can dismiss or attack, as someone they have no choice but to respect." That night, Selthra lay awake, her throat aching, her mind replaying the attack. They'd tried to cut away the one thing that made her matter, the one thing that had ever given her value. But Caldric's words echoed louder. "I won't let them win by silencing you again." Maybe her voice had been silent for 24 years, buried under rejection and fear. But it had survived. And now that she knew what she was, now that she understood the legacy of singers who'd fought and died so their bloodline might one day sing again, she refused to be silenced by anyone, not by packs who feared her, not by courts who hated her, not even by assassins with knives. She would heal, and then she would sing louder than ever. Chapter 7. The Return of Shadows. Selthra's throat had healed enough to speak normally, but singing still caused pain, a fact that made her feel vulnerable as she stood in the throne room facing the 2 wolves who'd made her life a nightmare. Aldrich and Morvana had arrived at court with an entourage and accusations, their false concern perfectly performed. Pack leader Aldrich bowed to Caldric with exaggerated respect, before gesturing to Selthra. "Your Majesty, we come seeking justice. This Omega was taken from Shadowpine without proper compensation or legal transfer. We demand either her return or payment for the loss of Pack property." "I claimed her under the law of recognition," Caldric said, his voice cold. "No, compensation is required." "Ah, but the circumstances were suspicious, weren't they?" Morvana stepped forward, beautiful in silk that probably cost more than Selthra's yearly food budget. "Tell me, Your Majesty, did you investigate Selthra's history before claiming her? Did you know she has a documented pattern of instability?" "That's a lie," Selthra said, but her voice came out weak, still raspy from the attack. Is it? Morvana's eyes glittered with malice. She was found talking to herself constantly, obsessive behaviors, delusions of grandeur, and then there are the accusations from several pack members that she attempted to seduce them, trying to secure a mate through manipulation when no one would choose her naturally. The court erupted in whispers. Selthra felt the familiar weight of shame trying to settle on her shoulders, the old conditioning that said, whatever they accused her of must be true because she was nothing. But then Kaldrick's voice cut through the noise. These are serious accusations. Do you have evidence? We have witness testimony, Aldrich said smoothly, producing documents. Signed statements from pack members detailing her concerning behavior. Testimony from wolves under your authority, Kaldrick observed. Wolves who would say whatever you ordered them to say. Your Majesty wounds me. Aldrich pressed a hand to his chest. We only want what's best for the poor girl. Clearly she's been manipulating you with whatever tricks she learned. I can defend myself, Selthra interrupted, her voice stronger now. She looked at Kaldrick. May I speak freely? He nodded, and she saw trust in his eyes, belief in her. She turned to face the court, to face Aldrich and Morvana, and every wolf who'd decided she was worthless before knowing her name. You say I talked to myself. I was isolated in a basement, given no companionship, worked from dawn until long past dusk. Speaking aloud was the only way to remind myself I existed. You call that instability. I call it survival. Her gaze found Morvana. And the accusations of seduction? Name one pack member. Just one. Give me a single name of someone I supposedly approached. Morvana's smile faltered slightly. I don't have the specific names here. Because there are no names. Because it never happened. Selthra's hands clenched at her sides. You're so desperate to discredit me that you've invented an entire fiction. But you forgot one crucial thing. I lived in that pack house for 24 years. I know things you wish I didn't. Such as, Aldrich's tone carried warning. Such as the donations to the pack fund that somehow ended up purchasing your private estate. Such as the 3 Omegas who've disappeared from Shadowpine in the last 5 years after complaining about Morvana's treatment. Such as the falsified territory reports you've been submitting to the Crown to avoid taxes. She looked directly at Kaldrick. I worked in the kitchens, Your Majesty. I saw the ledgers when they were left out. I saw the private correspondence. They thought I was too stupid to read, too insignificant to notice. But I noticed everything. Aldrich's face had gone pale. You have no proof. Actually, Thormund stepped forward holding documents. We investigated after Miss Selthra shared her concerns. These are copies of Shadowpine's official reports to the Crown versus their actual territory earnings. The discrepancy is significant. And we've located 2 of the missing Omegas. They're willing to testify about what they endured under Morvana's authority. The throne room exploded in voices. Kaldrick held up a hand for silence, his expression carved from ice. It appears, he said quietly, that you came here to accuse an Omega of crimes while committing far worse ones yourselves. Pack leader Aldrich, you are hereby under investigation for fraud and tax evasion. Morvana, you will answer questions regarding the treatment of Omegas in your care. He stood, and his voice carried absolute authority. This court recognizes that Selthra was not stolen. She was rescued, and any further claims on her will be considered an act of hostility against the Crown. Aldrich lunged forward, his control finally snapping. You would believe a rejected Omega over a pack leader? She's nothing. She She's more honest than you've ever been." Caldric descended from his throne to stand beside Selthra, and she just proved that intelligence and dignity have nothing to do with rank. Take them to holding. We'll continue this investigation properly. As guards led Aldrich and Morvana away, her spitting curses, him making threats, Selthra felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain this time, something like vindication, like justice. Caldric turned to her, and his expression held pride. "Well done." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I know, but you spoke anyway. That's what courage actually looks like." That night, as word spread through the court about what Selthra had revealed, the whispers changed. Not all of them. Some nobles still hated her, still wanted her gone, but others looked at her differently, saw past the Omega to the person who'd survived cruelty and emerged with enough strength to speak truth to power. Selthra stood at her window, looking at the stars, and thought about the singers who'd come before her. They'd fought with their voices when they could, but sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to lie, refuse to be silent, refuse to accept that someone else's cruelty defined your worth. She was still learning to be brave, but she was learning. Chapter 8. The Beast Unleashed. The state dinner was meant to celebrate the summer solstice, but tension hung in the air like a coming storm. Selthra sat at Caldric's right hand, a position that had scandalized half the court, watching nobles pick at their food and exchange meaningful glances. The full moon rose outside the great windows, massive and silver and merciless. "Your Majesty seems unwell," Advisor Malcor observed from across the table, his voice carrying false concern. Caldric's knuckles had gone white around his wine glass. Selthra saw the tremor in his hands, the way his breathing had become labored. Too early. The transformation shouldn't start until midnight at least. "I'm fine," Caldric said, but his voice came out strained. Selthra opened her mouth to suggest they retire when pain exploded in her throat. Sharp, burning, wrong. She gasped, her hand flying to her neck, where the assassination wound had healed. But this wasn't a physical injury. This was something else, something magical. She tried to hum, to test her voice, and agony shot through her like lightning. Her voice was cursed. Someone had cursed her voice. Across the table, Malcor's lips curved in the barest smile. "Caldric," Selthra whispered urgently, but he wasn't listening anymore. His eyes had gone golden, wild, his body beginning to convulse. Around them, nobles pushed back from the table in alarm as the king's bones began to crack and reshape. "Everyone out!" Thormund roared, but it was too late. Caldric's transformation ripped through him faster than Selthra had ever seen, violent and complete. One moment he was a man fighting for control. The next, a massive beast stood where the king had been, 9 feet of muscle and fur and rage, with eyes that held no recognition, no humanity at all. The beast roared, and the sound shattered crystal glasses. Nobles screamed, running for the doors. Guards rushed forward with silver chains, but the beast tore through them like paper. This wasn't the partial transformations Selthra had helped him through before. This was total, absolute, monstrous. The beast's eyes found her, and Selthra saw no trace of Caldric in them. Only hunger, only violence. She had to sing, had to reach him before he killed someone. But when she opened her mouth, the curse activated, sending pain through her, throat so severe she nearly collapsed. She couldn't. She physically couldn't force sound past the magical barrier. The beast lunged toward a group of cowering nobles. Selthra screamed. Not words, just raw sound, and the pain was indescribable. like swallowing broken glass, like fire in her veins, like dying. But the sound came out, and the beast hesitated. She sang, despite the agony, despite the curse trying to silence her. She sang the lullaby she'd used before, the one about moonlight and home, and every note was torture. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Her vision blurred, but she didn't stop. The beast turned fully toward her now, taking a step that shook the floor. "I know you're in there," Selthra gasped between phrases, tears streaming down her face. "I know you can hear me, Caldric. Come back. Please come back." She poured everything into the song, not just her voice, but her heart, her acceptance of all he was, beast and man alike, her trust that he wouldn't hurt her, her love, because somewhere between teaching sessions and midnight conversations, she'd fallen completely in love with the cursed king who treated her like she mattered. Something shifted in the magic. The curse on her voice wavered, cracked, and suddenly shattered like glass. Her voice burst free, clear and powerful, and full of all the emotions she'd been too afraid to name. The beast roared again, but this time it sounded like anguish, like a man trapped inside his own body fighting to resurface. "That's it," Selthra encouraged, stepping closer despite every instinct screaming to run. "Fight for it. Fight for yourself. I'm here. I'm not leaving. I will never leave." The transformation reversed, but not completely. Caldric's body shifted, reformed, but kept elements of the beast. When he finally stood before her, he was something between man and wolf, both forms existing simultaneously. His eyes were human again, aware and horrified. "Selthra," he choked out, "you're bleeding." "I'm fine." She swayed, exhausted from fighting the curse, from singing through pain that should have silenced her. Caldric caught her before she fell, his arms, clawed but gentle, cradling her carefully. "What did you do? The curse on your voice broke it." She managed a weak smile. "Love is stronger than fear. Even the witch council can't curse what comes from the heart." Around them, the throne room was destroyed. Nobles huddled in corners, guards watching warily. But Thormund approached slowly, his eyes on the king's transformed state. "Your Majesty? Are you yourself?" "I am." Caldric's voice was rough, layered with bestial tones, but his words were clear. "Both parts of me, integrated. The curse isn't gone, but—" He looked down at Selthra with wonder. "I have control, real control." "The curse is breaking," Thormund breathed. "She's actually breaking it." Malcor stood at the back of the room, his face pale with rage. He turned and fled, before anyone could stop him, already planning his next move. The singer had proven too strong. The council would need to try something more permanent. But Selthra, held in the arms of a king who was finally learning to accept all parts of himself, felt only triumph. They'd wanted to silence her. Instead, she'd sung louder than ever before. And she was just getting started. Chapter 9. The Queen's Song. The coronation hall blazed with ceremony and expectation. Selthra stood in silver and white, the colors of the moon itself, her hair adorned with crystals that caught the light like stars. In the 3 months since the state dinner, Caldric had maintained his integrated form, man and beast existing in harmony, his curse finally broken. Today he would crown her queen. But as Selthra knelt before the throne, the hall's great doors burst open. The witch council entered like a plague. 7 figures in black robes, their faces hidden, their power crackling in the air like static. Malcor led them, his hood thrown back to reveal eyes that glowed with unnatural light. "This ceremony cannot proceed," Malcor announced, his voice magically amplified. King Caldric has been compromised by dark magic, his judgment corrupted. And this Omega is unfit to rule, a pretender who used forbidden arts to seduce a cursed king. He raised his hands, and the other council members did the same. By the authority granted to us as protectors of the realm, we invoke the right of magical intervention. The crown is forfeit. Power surged through the hall, dark, suffocating magic meant to strip Caldric of his authority and bind both rulers in place. Nobles screamed. Guards drew weapons but found themselves frozen, unable to move. Caldric snarled, his beast nature rising, but the council's combined magic held even him. "Selthra," he growled, "your voice. Use it now." But Selthra wasn't thinking about power or combat. She was thinking about the archive full of murdered singers, about the basement where she'd learned to be invisible, about every Omega who'd been told their voice didn't matter. She stood, and the council's magic tried to force her down. She stood anyway. "You're right about one thing," Selthra said quietly, and somehow her words carried through the chaos. "I am unfit to be queen by your standards. I'm a rejected Omega with no rank, no pack status, no traditional power." She moved toward them, each step an act of defiance against the magic trying to stop her. "But I am exactly the queen this kingdom needs." She began to sing the Luna hymn, not as a weapon, not as a demonstration, as a prayer, genuine, heartfelt, desperate. She sang for every singer who'd been hunted and killed, for every Omega who'd been dismissed and rejected, for every powerless wolf who'd been told they didn't matter. Her voice rose, and this time the magic that manifested wasn't golden light or raw power. It was silver, pure, divine, untouchable. The moon goddess herself was answering. The Luna hymn had always been a prayer for the chosen Luna, a blessing for she who would lead with wisdom and mercy. Selthra sang it now, not asking to be chosen, but offering herself, all her pain, all her strength, all her determination to make the world better for those who came after her. The silver light blazed brighter than anything Selthra had ever channeled. It poured through the hall like a cleansing flood, and where it touched the witch council, their dark magic simply dissolved. They screamed as their power was stripped away, leaving them ordinary wolves who'd chosen corruption over honor. "No," Malcor shrieked. "We are the council. We are—" "Nothing," Caldric said, free of their binding now. "You are nothing. Guards, arrest them all." As the council was dragged away, Selthra's song gentled into something softer, a lullaby for a kingdom that had lived in fear for too long. When she finally stopped singing, the silence that followed felt sacred. Caldric approached her, the crown, meant for her head held in his hands. "You didn't just break my curse, Selthra. You broke the hold fear has had on this kingdom for generations." "We broke it," she corrected, "together." He crowned her before the entire court, and when she rose as queen, the applause was genuine. Not all the nobles approved. Some never would, but enough had seen what real power looked like, what real strength meant. 6 months later, Selthra stood before 30 Omegas in the newly built Academy of First Songs. They'd come from across the kingdom, rejected, dismissed, told they were worthless, just like she'd been. They looked at her with hope and fear, waiting to learn if this was real or just another cruelty. "They rejected us because they feared us," Selthra said, her voice clear and strong in the training hall. "They sensed something different in our bloodlines, something that threatened their power structures. So they made us believe we were broken." She smiled at their uncertain faces. They We're right to be afraid. But we will use our power not for revenge, but for change. We will be healers, mediators, teachers. We will prove that strength comes in many forms, and mercy is the greatest power of all. She began to sing, a simple melody, a beginner's exercise, an invitation. One voice joined hers, then another, and another. 30 voices, some rough and untrained, some clear as bells, all of them finally allowed to sing without shame. The sound built into harmony, into something that shook the very air with possibility. This was revolution, not violence or vengeance, but voices that had been silenced learning to sing together, learning that they'd never been nothing, learning that they'd always been exactly what they were meant to be. And Selthra, the rejected Omega who'd been asked to sing as a joke and had sung so powerfully she'd frozen a king. She listened to the chorus of her students and knew that this was why she'd survived. Not to save one cursed king, though. She'd gladly done that. But to prove to every forgotten Omega that their voice mattered, that they mattered. The Academy's song carried through Ironmaw Keep and out into the kingdom beyond, the sound of a new world being born.